we are. We are live and going to be doing a summary tonight for Luna's Government Transparency Task Force. That's right. I put together a whole presentation. So sit back and enjoy. We're going to start with the JFK files first and see what we can get into here. The official government version of events is summarized in the Warren Report. The Warren Report the Warren Commission was headed by Allen Dulles, the brother of John Foster Dulles. These two brothers are essentially the people who set up the Central Intelligence Agency. So, very interesting history. They both grew up in a family of around a lot of foreign policy organizers and learned a lot about foreign policy and also the intelligence services and how the spycraft works. So Hale Boggs is one of the famous members of the Warren Commission who started questioning the conclusions of the Warren Commission, and before he could really begin pointing out more of the problems, they assassinated him, or at least his plane vanished in Alaska. They've never found his body, the plane, or his co-pilot. I don't know if it was his co-pilot or Nick Begich Sr. was also on that plane, which disappeared. Number of other suspicious disappearances and deaths in the Kennedy assassination. We're going to talk about many of these people and why they are important to the story. So, again, the magic bullet theory is let's try this out here. The magic bullet theory is the official version for why all these wounds occurred the way that they did. So, let me just switch my... No, that's not it. Okay. Anyways, so the magic bullet is this pristine bullet that was found on the stretcher in Parkland Hospital, Exhibit 399 from the National Archives, which claims that it did all the bullet wounds in both the president and Senator Connolly sitting in the seat in front. Oswald was blamed as the lone nut shooter, a communist sympathizer who defected to Russia and also, had some ties to, not only communism, but also pro-Castro Cuban groups as well. And but there's more to the story of Lee Harvey Oswald. This is a young Lee with his mother, Margaret Oswald. Margaret maintained for many years after the assassination that her son was an intelligence asset and deeply involved in the intelligence community. So the deeper we dive into Lee Harvey Oswald and his background, the more we learn that, he's surrounded by the intelligence agencies and the people that recruit for them and bring young recruits into these intelligence forces. Interesting. David Ferry is right here and pictured in the Civil Air Patrol with Lee Harvey Oswald back in the day. So that connection will come up deeper once we dig into, the Civil Air Patrol and why the Civil Air Patrol became a recruiting ground for CIA recruits. Oswald gets into the Marines from there. He goes to Atsugi Air Force Base in the Marines. He's stationed as a radar operator at the radar base where the CIA runs all the U-2 spy plane flights out of. So Japan's, this side of the map, and they fly them literally over Russia, over Greenland, and then over Canada and down into and they land them out at Area 51. and then they disassemble the U-2 spy plane, put it back on a C-4 Galaxy, and fly it back to Japan, and do the process over again. And that was how the CIA was running the U-2 spy plane operations and the spy program back in that day, until Lee Harvey Oswald, recruited through David Ferrie and the Civil Air Patrol, defects from the to the Soviet Union. He applies for a visa to go. He applies for a leave, and he applies for a visa to go visit the Soviet Union. He flies to Finland and then flies into Soviet Union, from Finland into Moscow on a 7-day visa, and then meets with this guy from the KGB, apparently, no, at least not from the KGB, but connected with the KGB, and then when the guy basically turns him down, Oswald, and Oswald finds out he's got to leave the country. He slits his wrists and goes to a mental hospital, and then eventually, I guess they let him stay in Russia. He tries to denounce his U.S. citizenship. They didn't let him completely denounce his citizenship, but he at least tries to. And then the book that the guy gives him after meeting with him is called The Idiot, which is, he takes it like as a personal insult, which I believe it was. And he proposes to his girlfriend Ella in January 1960, but she turns him down. And that's when he starts feeling like he doesn't want to stay in Russia anymore. He starts trying to make plans to leave and go elsewhere. He moves to Minsk, and then from Minsk he meets, Marina Oswald, his future wife. Marina, her real name is Marina Nikolaevna Prusakova, and the fact and fiction is always different. In fiction they got this James Bond character that we all learn about, but in reality, these CIA agents that are trying to go over and be double agents and infiltrate and do spy work are like Lee Harvey Oswald. The CIA background, and then this decision to defect to Russia and try to give them at least some intelligence so that they trust him, and then believe that he's trustworthy, so he can infiltrate their intelligence. And what ends up happening is, he meets the niece, of a guy from the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Russia, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and it's just a high-ranking colonel in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and this is his niece. And I guess Lee Harvey Oswald injures himself a day later and winds up in the hospital. Marina comes and visits him, and then they make this big friendship, and then they decide to get married. And Lee eventually, finds a way to get her out of the country, and gets, even though that she's the daughter of a government officer connected to, the Russian government, somehow she's allowed entry into the U.S., and he's allowed to come back to the U.S. with his Russian wife. And I guess she was pregnant. I don't know if she was pregnant at the time or what, but Oswald comes back to the U.S., lives in New Orleans, and works for a guy named Guy Bannister in Louisiana. And Guy Bannister is, super interesting what Guy's having him do. He has him work for an anti-Castro group, and then he creates a pro-Castro group and starts passing out flyers for this pro-Castro meeting, and puts his name and his office on the flyer for where everyone can come and check out the meeting. And the address that he puts on there is 544 Camp Street, New Orleans. And someone gets this flyer and is like, gets into a literal fist fight with Lee over the contents of the flyer. It gets all mad and starts fist fighting with Lee Oswald, and Oswald's arrested for assault, and he tells the police, call FBI agent Quigley, and Agent Quigley comes down to the station and gets Oswald released. Um, but Quigley's sort of this go-between agent between Guy Bannister's office, who's run out of 544 Camp Street, and Guy Bannister is literally the FBI agent that created the X files for the FBI, the Security Matter X. So it's pretty nuts. And guys, yes, we are live. I can see your comments and your chats out there. Sorry for the late start, and hopefully you guys are enjoying this presentation and what we're going to get into here tonight with the JFK assassination and what we're going to find in these documents and learn about the history. This is JFK. I mean, this is Lee Harvey Oswald with his wife Marina. This is Lee Harvey Oswald hanging out with a bunch of his buddies in Russia when he first went over there. This is Ruth Payne here in these two pictures, and she was interested in Marina Oswald and getting Lee away from Marina any way possible. She's a closet lesbian. I know that she had lesbian porn. She had a lot of real weird secrets. Apparently, one of her mistress was Alan Dulles' mistress. So she has ties to Alan Dulles. Her sister worked for the CIA, and she had a boarding house, or at least another house, where she gave Marina an apartment, and I believe she rented another home to Lee as well. I don't know if there's like two separate apartments, but she's like the landlady for the whole operation, and she's got these connections that nobody knows about to the CIA. About 85% of the Warren Commission's based on Ruth Payne's testimony. She's literally the one who introduced Lee to D. Harold Bird and got him the job at the School Book Depository building, which D. Harold Bird owned. In addition to being the founder of the Civil Air Patrol, which we'll get into. D. Harold Bird is like the key to the whole assassination and really understanding, who boots on the ground in Dallas really set Oswald up for the role of Patsy in the assassination. Him having that close connection with Ruth Payne, Oswald's landlady, who's the closet lesbian, trying to get with Oswald's wife, Marina, and also her husband, who's also gay, and they're kind of both in this fake relationship with one another for the show. And we find out, that Michael Payne's gay, married to Ruth Payne, who's also gay. They are just married on the surface for the illusion, because it's the 1960s and it's totally not acceptable. And both of them are being used with their blackmail evidence of their gayness. But like apparently she was set up with blackmail evidence by the same woman from the CIA that knew Alan Dulles, and Michael Payne was set up with some blackmail, homosexual blackmail as well. And so both of them were controlled, and we'll find that theme very common throughout a number of key people in the assassination, including David Ferrie, the gay CIA pilot who set up the Civil Air Patrol and used to try to hook up with the boys that would join, and that he would be in charge of training at the Civil Air Patrol there. And he was found dead. This is them bringing the body out of the apartment where he was just before he was due to testify to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was, basically trying to reopen the investigation into Kennedy and some of the strange characters surrounding Kennedy, which, New Orleans DA Jim Garrison began to go after Clay Shaw and some of these, the mafia connections surrounding New Orleans and David Ferrie and some of these other individuals, and ran into a lot of problems as the DA trying to investigate and prosecute people who may have been involved in the conspiracy to assassinate the president. on November 22nd, 1963. So D. Harold Byrd also sets up the Civil Air Patrol, where David Ferry's working for him, recruiting, young cadets like Oswald into the CIA. Um, D. Harold Byrd also owns the Texas School Book Depository building, right where Oswald allegedly shoots the president from. He's also the board director of LTV Aerospace Aeronautics Division, and LTV is this conglomerate that forms together in about 2 years before then, and it builds off a number of these companies which did some top secret flying saucer and X-Files work for the aerospace black projects industry in the 1940s and 50s. So in the 60s, these companies sort of come together, form LTV. Ling and Vought built the Vaught flying pancake out of Wright-Patterson and a number of the Alfred C. Loading craft that I've covered in other videos and talked about before. So the suspicious investment of Ling and D. Harold Byrd, they bought 132,000 shares of stock in this defense contractor LTV in November 1963, right about the time of right before the JFK assassination. So this stock, which no one thought would perform or do anything, they just decide to invest a ton of money in the stock, and then after at the JFK assassination, this company gets tons of these black budget contracts to do all kinds of new age fighter jets and designs and styles, and I mean these super lightweight and really fast jet aircraft. I mean, look at the size of the jet engine on this airplane compared to the size of the plane. It was built obviously for power and speed, the max that they realized they could go, which we'll get to in a later series. This show is going to run for 2 hours, and we'll see as far as we can get in this very large and comprehensive presentation. G. Harold Byrd was a trophy collector. Good friends. Here he is with Lyndon Baines Johnson. There's LBJ right there with D. Harold Byrd at a big event. And this is a elephant that D. Harold Byrd shot. And apparently D. Harold Byrd, built this museum on the school book depository building, but he took out the original window where Oswald, allegedly fired the kill shot from, and he replaced it with another one of the windows from the factory. I mean from the school book depository building. But he put that window in his trophy room, and allegedly this isn't a picture of his real trophy room. This is just a picture we had to use for we pulled off the internet. There's a source for it. You can get the sources for all this in the description of the video down below. There's more links to more information and sources on all this stuff. But apparently he took the window out of the Texas School Book Depository building and put that in his trophy room next to his elephant heads. And he went hunting in Africa and shot some elephant heads too, just, following the assassination. And, when he died and they sold off all his assets in the trophy room, this went on auction, the window from the sixth floor school book depository building, but it sat in D. Harold Byrd's trophy room for all those years, as along with all the other animals that he shot. Very interesting for that. And yeah, I spent the last 2 weeks working on this and putting a ton of new stuff into it. So enjoy. Textron Helicopter was also in Dallas, Texas. They were also here in Rhode Island during the 60s, and merged into General Dynamics and Electric Boat, which is a huge defense contractor right down here locally to this day. But Bell Helicopter made out a ton on the JFK assassination during the 60s, selling all the helicopters to the Vietnam War. All the Vietnam War needed tons of helicopters, so they definitely made bank. And then Textron Bell Helicopter was the one that made the Cessna that JFK Jr. was flying in when JFK Jr. crashed. And Textron Bell Helicopter was the one that did the investigation into JFK Jr.'s plane and the engine, and took the engine apart to determine why and how it failed. So weird stuff going on there. If they got the experts in these engines potentially involved, where there's this crossover tie between the JFK assassination of JFK and JFK Jr. both. So LBJ, is everyone knows, there's tons of pictures of him in the early days flying around in these helicopters. He had these PR stunts where he'd fly down in the middle of the city in one of these helicopters, and then fly off in the helicopter after. So the helicopter industry was, basically, where did he get his helicopters from to do all these PR stunts? But I mean, it worked. It won tons of votes. People are like, "Oh, this guy's so cool. He just flew in a helicopter and then took off in a helicopter." And this was back in days when a lot of people didn't see a lot of helicopters, so it was quite a spectacle to see something that could vertically take off and land like that, and then have this guy, promising you the world, if you vote for him, come out of this thing. It worked, and so he was the vice president for JFK, and apparently there's a number of powerful people that were in on something behind the scenes that whole event, because he did this weird wink to Rep. Albert Thomas, the wink heard round the world, it's been called. So immediately after they get JFK out of the way, they start the Vietnam War, and so all these rainbow herbicides that they had developed during the rainbow herbicide program, like Agent Orange, along with all the other different colors in the rainbow, but Agent Orange was the most popular one that they like to use, and they called it that because it's there in the background, them using it. It was orange. They dropped this orange stuff out of it's dioxin, is the real active chemical ingredient, but it would just kill all and defoliate all the vegetation. And that was developed under the rainbow herbicide program, which was developed by Frank Olson, who was, we'll get into in this presentation as well. Again, lots of money being, in the background, and lots of programs, and everything in here costs money. It was all behind the scenes, a lot of people making that money. As we get to in the whole history of who was making the decisions for the Pentagon, and during that time period, and who these people were and where they came from. Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense. Of course, Robert McNamara, before becoming Secretary of Defense, he left a job as the CEO of Ford Motor Company, where his salary was $3 million per year. And he became the Secretary of Defense, now only making $250,000 per year salary. So why take a pay cut? And he admitted he knew nothing about the job, didn't really know what he was doing or why he was there. But apparently he was there to run some sort of important financial decisions, which involved industry and the military-industrial complex, because after he left the Secretary of Defense position, he became head of the World Bank. So it just shows the deep state operating right here in one picture from the head of the Pentagon during the JFK assassination, Robert McNamara, who also ties into 9/11. We'll talk about, because he authored the Operation Northwoods document, which they were going to shoot down planes and blame it on Cuba, and under the guise of a terrorist attack, false flag terrorism. And that plan was approved by Robert McNamara. So I could see why, Johnson was just shaking his head and doing the face palms, and both of them did quite a bit of face palming, really, not believing that they were getting away with what they were getting away with. Ford, as people know, used to be the Philco company. Ford Motor Company and Ford. Ford had a division of Ford Motor Company, which is Ford Aerospace, which Ford Philco, they made a ton of stuff like refrigerators, audio and electronics and other stuff. And eventually, Ford Philco becomes the Aeronutronic Ford Corporation, and then it becomes Ford Aerospace. And Ford Aerospace gets the contracts in the 80s for the Skynet control facilities and all this other stuff. So the Ford Aerospace connection and the fact that Rob McNamara comes into this position, and what kind of contracts were given to Ford during that switchover in the 1960s is also important and very relevant as well. We talk about the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman with John Perkins, and we can see exactly what happened to Vietnam with the corrupt bankers being installed in the economic hitman that went into Vietnam, and what has happened in Vietnam in the years since. And as we mentioned before, this is just kind of a little side detail. We learned from the John Perkins story that John Perkins was recruited into the NSA. He thought he'd be a reject because he had covered for a friend of his who had stabbed someone at a party, and he told that story to the NSA when they had interviewed him, and they were intrigued that he had covered for his friend for crimes, and so that's why part of the reason he got recruited, and he wasn't called by the NSA. They called him back on another company, and he went to work for a whole nother private company that the NSA was an NSA front, kind of like Snowden worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, and that was really just the NSA front. So there was a lot of fronts that operated also with the JFK assassination, which we'll talk about, and also the hitman that were kind of related to this, like Malcolm Wallace, LBJ's hitman. Apparently, his fingerprint was found in the sniper's nest. There's some evidence for that, and talk about discussion of that. The fingerprints found in the nest didn't actually belong to Lee, and they later figured out that they belonged to this gentleman. The interesting thing, there was this whole Bay of Pigs invasion so the reason the Bay of Pigs failed, the original promise kept by Eisenhower was not kept by the subsequent administration. It allowed hostile air to wipe out the approaching invasion force. So Secretary of the State was mad, obviously, that his plan fell through. A number of these guys, we'll find out, were arrested in Dealey Plaza that day, or at least people that look very similar to a number of people involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion. And there were, E. Howard Hunt later arrested in the Watergate burglary. So again, that connection. But these are them being walked past the Texas School Book Depository building, and we'll give some reference on this. This is the motorcade route across Elm Street, and then Houston Street's going down this way. But this is a street that goes by the front of the Texas School Book Depository building, goes back here into a parking lot where there's all train tracks behind. And we'll talk about what these tramps may have been doing, what they were doing before the assassination, during the assassination, and after the assassination, and sort of their movements, and why it could be of interest. Here's this guy using what looks like a radio. Looks like he's got a radio to talk to the men. He's looking towards the grassy knoll, white picket fence, where the shots were allegedly fired from. And he's looks to be like he's on a radio or talking on a radio, but he's hiding it every time he sees a camera or someone with a camera, which is interesting. And these two photographers, again, taking pictures of the people on the lawn. Abraham Zapruder was standing right here on the edge of this platform right there. And Gordon Arnold standing behind him back here. And we'll find other shots and link all this up. Some people have suggested this is David Sanchez Morales, but he would have already started growing gray hair by 1963. It was likely another Cuban connected to this. There's been another number of questions about who that may have been. There's been a number of Cubans that have been tied to people tied to Lee Harvey Oswald, who claim that they saw Lee Harvey Oswald with agents of the CIA. Again, going back to the whole administration before with Robert McNamara, and Robert McNamara was of course, Secretary of Defense during the Eisenhower administration. And Eisenhower was Ike and Dick. It was Eisenhower, and his vice president was Richard Nixon. So Richard Nixon being vice president, at the time that Richard Nixon's vice president, this is him with Prescott Bush, who is treating him not like the vice president, but like, like he owns the vice president. Basically, what I get from this picture, very interesting, going back to the history of all these connections. So Ike, warning us about the dangers, solder unsought of the military industrial complex before he leaves office. And then also what happened right before this, 30 years before the JFK assassination, because going 30 years after the JFK assassination would be 93, when the first time the World Trade Center was bombed. Um, Again, we'll get into that whole event and tie that in. But 30 years before was 1933, when General Smedley Butler had reported that there was a coup d'état led by members of these parties, and influenced by one of them. In part, it was Prescott Bush. Was involved in this whole. It's called the bankers plot, and yeah, you can look up the whole history of Smedley Butler, who was this general who was approached by members and tried to be recruited into this plot to take over the government and install a fascist dictatorship back in 1933. And he blew the whistle on this, wrote a whole book called War is a Racket, and how there's this group of people that just try to start wars and create wars because they make so much money off it that they really want to, that they'll fake wars and do all these events just to keep the money flowing. And it's super interesting when we look at those people that were involved in that plot and the similarities between what happened with that plot and what happened with the JFK assassination, and the businesses and people involved. So Jack Alston Crichton was, head of the, I think he was on Jack Crichton during the JFK assassination was one of the head guys that basically decided the route through Dallas, apparently. But he got to start with some of these big banking families and wealthy families. In 1952, Jack Crichton joined a syndicate that included Everett DeGloyer and Clint Murchison, and used those connections to his connections in government, with this guy, General Francisco Franco, to acquire these rare drilling rights in Spain. And that operation was handled by a company called Delta Drilling Operation, which was owned by Joe Zeppa. So Joseph Zeppa, as we know, was this guy started, Delta Drilling, and he owned a plane where he flew George and Barbara Bush out of Dallas the day of the assassination. Barbara Bush writes about this in her memoirs, and this is you can read about this on Who, What, Why, Russ Baker's site on Barbara's hair-raising day. She talks about what Bush was doing during the day of the assassination, because he's one of the few people who can't remember where he was or what he was doing that day. But what he was doing is he met with Alfred C. Ulmer. They talk about meeting with the Ulmers. And Alfred Ulmer was a coup d'etat expert, and he was from Greece. And then he gets flown out by this Mr. Zeppo man, who's again connected with Hunt and Murchison and all those oil baron guys who, we'll tie later into the assassination through some of their connections and their involvements surrounding that day. Clint Murchison, for example, owns this massive mansion where this huge party takes place the night before the assassination, and all these who's attend. And apparently the word's very quiet at the house, and some very mild whispers around, and a lot of secret off meetings and other side rooms happening the whole night, where they grab these people and bring them aside, bring them into a room and talk. And apparently Johnson, Lady Bird, not Lady Bird Johnson, but Johnson's mistress says that she was with him that night, and they dropped Johnson off at the house for about a half hour, 40 minutes, and then he came out, and they left and took off. And so there's a lot of this weird event that happened at Clint Murchison's house. Um, Again, General Edward Walker was shot at through the window. They tried to tie this to Lee Harvey Oswald later, saying that he's the one that shot at Lee Harvey at General Walker. Couldn't hit Walker through a window, a sitting target standing still through a window from 30 feet away. He couldn't hit that, but he could certainly pick off a moving target from 90 yards, which is it doesn't make sense. Haraldson Hunt, the oil depletion allowance, right? The discovery of oil in Texas made by a small group of men they made a great deal of money off this strategy of the oil depletion allowance. They could just build tons of wells, and if the wells stopped producing oil, they'd get a kickback from the government for the oil that the well didn't produce. They'd get the government would compensate them for the money that they wouldn't get. Yeah, exactly. So there's this big payback check that they're getting from their I just did my taxes, so think of like a huge tax kickback for your wells if they fail. And this was just creating this massive waste where they just build as many wells as possible, because the government would pay them back for any ones that stopped producing oil during this Texas oil rush of that time period. And yeah, so they just there's a number of other people connected. I mean, real high up in the CIA, the Office of Policy Coordination, which became the Espionage and Counterintelligence branch of the CIA. The head of that was a guy named Cord Meyer Jr. during the 63. And Cord Meyer Jr.'s wife was Mary Pinochet Meyer, who was one of those people in the first earlier that we said that was murdered 11 months after JFK. She was found dead, and they still haven't solved her murder or figured out who killed her. But she did sleep with JFK. It's well known that she had an affair with JFK, and that Cord Meyer Jr. was furious over this. And so, again, this is a picture of them finding her body and trying to investigate the crime scene. But JFK's mistress, who was the wife of this high-ranking CIA official, still not solved. Another loose end in the whole JFK assassination when you start digging into it. Allen Dulles, CIA was directly fired by Kennedy for the whole Bay of Pigs fiasco. And his brother, so Earl Cabell and Charles Cabell were brothers. The mayor of Dallas was brothers with the U.S. Air Force, the Charles Cabell, who was U.S. Air Force. He helped the CIA organize the Bay of Pigs invasion. And his brother was the mayor of Dallas. Think about that. Now, the Bay of Pigs invasion was run off. They staged it from these oil platforms out in the Gulf of Mexico, which were run by Zapata Oil Offshore Drilling Corporation. George W. Bush, his first company out of Yale was Zapata Offshore. It was an offshore drilling business that was basically a CIA front company that did drilling offshore and used the platforms for CIA operations in war zone areas. So all these very, very close connections to the mayor of Dallas, the guy who organized the Bay of Pigs invasion, George H.W. The Bay of Pigs invasion was codenamed Operation Zapata. That's Bush's company. And then Bush has this Parrott memo is another official JFK file. It's declassified. You can go look this up now. It's out there. But that Parrott memo was a call that George H.W. Bush made to the FBI the day of the assassination, saying that there was a guy named James Parrott threatening to kill the president, and that they might want to look into that, and that he was in Dallas but would be leaving. And he actually gave a speech at this Kiwanis Club, which is like this club for like 80-year-olds who were at the time, again, a very interesting alibi. It could have been anyone there giving the speech there. Well, I mean, because who's going to remember in a room full of 80-year-olds, which no one got called to testify until 76 anyway, which was a whole decade after the research. So, anyways, the Hoover memo is another one that states that George H.W. Bush of the CIA and Hoover basically calling out that he's calling out George H.W. Bush. He's leaving a paper trail, which we found and people have found and followed. I guarantee you there's more in the FBI's files that's going to come out. Again, George de Mohrenschildt is this Russian guy that meets Oswald and befriends him in Dallas, and is trying to sort of figure out Oswald. Apparently, he was paid by some Russian intel people to get intelligence on Oswald, but then was tapped by CIA also. So he's kind of like working for both of them. But he was a close personal friend. He knew George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush was in his phone book. He wrote a letter to George Bush right before he died, testifying to the commission, asking for help. And then that's about the same time that he provided these pictures to the Warren Commission of Lee Harvey Oswald with the rifle and the literature saying, he had the magazine up of calling General Walker the patsy. They're basically, it looks like the CIA used de Mohrenschildt and Ruth Paine to plant this evidence that, because that photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald with the rifle that everyone's seen holding up the literature, that wasn't found. They had already searched Ruth Paine's, Lee Harvey Oswald's residence, Ruth Paine's house, and everything. And then Ruth Paine comes back to them and says, "Oh, look what I found! Oh, I found these pictures of Lee with a rifle." And then at the same time, de Mohrenschildt goes and says, "I found these pictures of Lee with a rifle," and these, he's holding up literature of, saying that it was anti-Walker. So all this evidence appears at the same exact time, which is super curious, and from these two sources, which it looks like George de Mohrenschildt was writing to Bush, trying to save his life, and then planted this evidence for him just before they murdered him, 2 shots to the back of the head, and called it suicide, but right before he could actually testify. And yeah, it's insane. And then the House Select Committee on Assassinations wants to appoint someone who's completely unrelated to the CIA, who can come in and really investigate the CIA and clean up the CIA and get to the bottom of this Kennedy assassination business and figure out what's going on. So they hired George H.W. Bush to become head of the CIA, and nobody knows about these oil connections or the Zapata. Nobody puts it together or really figures it out or digs into this guy's past and figures this out. And they pulled it off because they owned so much of the media, and they were able to control so much of the media through the CIA and ridicule or assassinate the people that were connected to, that knew anything about it. And then what happened with George H.W. Bush afterwards is a whole nother story, because you can tell that this guy was part of a murder, part of a conspiracy to take over, and then involved in all sorts of criminal activity after the fact, with this group that had been set up. They had set up this group to kill Castro. It's called Operation 40. And they had put this group of 40 men together, and it was the intelligence agencies. And then the intelligence agencies in this Operation 40 group basically teamed up with organized crime industry. And there was a marriage between the CIA, the intelligence community, and organized crime. And that can be seen directly in this picture with some of the people here. But this guy is Barry Seal, for example, sitting next to Porter Goss. Porter Goss would become director of the CIA after 9/11, years and years later as a senior CIA official. But here he is way back in the day next to Barry Seal. Barry Seal would go on to become the big operation drug dealer and the guy who, close friend of Pablo Escobar, dealing with all the cocaine from Colombia and everything. And this group was set up by the CIA to assassinate Castro originally. So they were trying to assassinate Castro for the CIA, trying to infiltrate his men in his parliament, in his inner office, and they were trying to, assassinate him. Barry would apparently go rogue. They say that this wasn't sanctioned by the CIA, but the fact is that drug money, especially, bringing in kilos and kilos of cocaine into the country back in the 70s and 80s for Pablo Escobar, you could make millions and millions of untraceable dollars, which could be used for all kinds of CIA black operations, which they must have, loved that. And so the route here that shows where they took and how they got the drugs into the United States from Colombia shows that they went up here through Guatemala and Nicaragua, kind of flew Maine overland. And right about Guatemala is where they'd break off and just kind of they'd either go over Miami and drop them in the Everglades, which they started doing that originally, and it was a lot of the drugs were going to Miami, and then they eventually worked on these routes that would go into Mena, Arkansas, and they drop them in the Louisiana swamp, and then have Louisiana swampers go out and collect the cocaine. But Mena, Arkansas, and the airport there, where all the CIA cocaine planes were coming in and out of during this whole 2 decades, the 70s and 80s, that was Bill Clinton's job in Bill Clinton's state. And he's the one that oversaw all that, which is how he got to become president of the United States in the 90s as a no-name, who the hell is this guy from, of all places in the United States, Arkansas. Yeah, not kilos, but tons. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So Gary Webb, the reporter who did all the research into the CIA drug trafficking network that, traced from these CIA sources like Barry Seal and others to guys like Danilo Blandon, who was, the source for a lot of the cocaine explosion in LA during that time period, and Ricky Ross, who had set up he had bought a motel right off the freeway in LA, and he had set up the hotel as basically it was the Walmart of crack, and was distributing, many kilos and many kilos. He was buying it by the ton and then distributing the kilos throughout South Central LA. They did all the investigation to bring it back. This was around the time that George H.W. Bush made a White House advertisement for the drug on national television. And that's when use really exploded, is when he started advertising it and showing everyone this new drug that could get you high as hell. And it was super cheap back then. You could just buy, tons of high purity crack and coke right on the streets. But anyways, George W. Bush was in the National Guard in 71. 1971, this was before, kind of in the middle of all this, when a lot of the drug smuggling first started. 71 was also the year that Nixon started the war on drugs. But 71 is the year that George Bush meets James Reynolds Bath. So the guy that Bush goes AWOL from the National Guard, and the guy who covers for him is a guy named James Reynolds Bath, and they become good friends. And then he gets hooked into the whole Bush family, and they hook him in as this middleman with these guys over in Saudi Arabia that they want to do business with, but they kind of need a middleman to sort of break the distance between them. And so James R. Bath becomes this, enterprise guy for Harkin Energy, and also the Saudi bin Laden group. And Saudi bin Laden group, the middleman between the Bush family and the bin Laden family, which, started back in the 70s. And this is when they had to, right around 76, when the Bush had to clean up the CIA, he had to move a lot of these operations underground and find different ways to fund them that were more discreet, and basically didn't want to stop or clean up the CIA, just figure out how to, blame it on other people or move it, outsource it to middlemen and other. So they were getting creative during this whole 70s time. And that's when they created this bank called the BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, out in Pakistan. And the BCCI out in Pakistan really changed the whole infrastructure, because they funded terrorists, they funded black operations, and all kinds of stuff. This was with the bank that funded the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in northern Afghanistan, the group that would eventually turn into Al Qaeda. And very interesting how all that connects to, you know, 9/11, which we'll get into in later episodes of this. We're going to do one more hour here, and then we're going to end it wherever we get to. But there's a number of these people like Barry Seal, David Ferry, Rudy Deckers, the guy that ran the flight school that trained the 9/11 hijackers, and James Arbath, the National Guard buddy of George W. Bush, who became the liaison between the Bush and the Bin Laden families. These guys are all CIA pilots. You know, Rudy Deckers later got connected to running drugs and stuff. And then also David Ferry was allegedly involved in drug and gun running. And all this very interesting connections between, you know, these types of these same kind of characters, which appear in both these operations. So I just thought I'd point that out. The other thing that's interesting is the case officer for the CIA, who was the CIA's case officer on um, all of the mafia stuff that was going on, was a guy named William Harvey. So he was the CIA's mafia point man to sort of keep track of all the mafia operations. And he's sort of the guy that they reached out to when they said, hey, you know, we're having trouble killing Castro. We don't know how to get to him. And we need, you know, see what you can do with the mafia, because the mafia, they get all these people whacked and they're really good at this. And maybe they know something or can come up with something we don't know. And there might be a way to work something out. And very interesting. A lot of the mafia connections that they get to, the way that Harvey gets to the mafia is he goes through a guy named Robert Mayhew. Robert Mayhew's wrapped up in this QK enchant project. He's the protege of Howard Hughes, so takes on Howard Hughes's business and his fortune after Howard Hughes passes on. And Robert Mayhew is involved in this operation to put wiretaps in these offices, kind of like Watergate style, and they get caught with the wiretaps. The technicians get caught installing the wiretaps, and he's going to go down for all this, and William Harvey bails him out. So Mayhew sets up these meetings with some of his mob guys that he knows. He knows some of these mob people, and sets up this meeting as basically the liaison between, you know, the CIA and the mob to you know, make these kind of connections and stuff, which is really interesting, the whole mob connection and why the mob's involved in this and their role, because it goes back to 1959 when Fidel Castro takes over Cuba, kicks out Batista, and kicks out all the casinos and organized crime. They literally, you know, burn down the casinos out in the streets, kick out all the gangsters and the banksters, and tell them you can't operate here anymore. We're cleaning everything up in this country, and you ain't allowed there. Meyer Lansky and all these gangsters move out of Cuba, and they move to Miami and New Orleans, and they're trying to set up in there and try to figure out, you know, how to reestablish what's going on in there. Eventually, they start the whole Las Vegas Strip. So they realize, hey, this Las Vegas place would be a great place to, the laws are different out there. It would be a good place to, build all these casinos and get things started out there. So, and also the CIA is got a lot of connections out in Las Vegas at this time, because we know that they found a great place out in the desert near a place called Groom Dry Lake to experiment on all kinds of top secret research projects out there, where far, far away from prying eyes out in the desert, right? So, boom, they start building. The gangsters get kicked out of Cuba. They hate Castro. They wish they could, get at Castro out and move back into Cuba, and so they're running and set up Las Vegas. They build, the Las Vegas Strip, all the power that's readily available there from the recently completed Hoover Dam and built in the 30s. So they got tons of electric power out in the desert there, tons of cheap land and water, and everything's good. So they just it's a boom town, and it grows like kudzu in the forest. So, in any case, Mayhew sets up these meetings, and between the CIA, because the CIA is turning to, we need help with Castro. So they approach these meetings, and Johnny Rosselli sets up this meeting with Sam Giancana, and that's where a lot of people believe that the Kennedy assassination was birthed out of, is these meetings where, oh, the mob, you want to have the mob's help in killing Castro, and they had set up these groups, but these organizations like Operation 40 with the CIA and the mob, organized crime, to try and assassinate Castro. And when everything went, these same groups could have easily just been turned on the president. His is Barry Seal right here, and then Porter Goss, with this future CIA director. Again, Sam Giancana was no joke, and Sam Giancana hated the Kennedy brothers. RFK was attorney general, and basically was trying to go after all organized crime. He had Sam Giancana come down and testify, subpoenaed him into court, and asked him a whole bunch of questions. You go watch that interview sometime. It's wild. If you can go watch that full deposition between Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and Sam Giancana, because some wild stuff happens in that. Sam Giancana just won't answer any questions. Just says, "I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth on the grounds that I may incriminate myself," to every question that he asks him. And then, he's giggling when he asks him certain questions, and about, do you know anything about my brother's death and everything? And he's giggling, and he said, I thought only little girls giggled. And then, a couple of years later, RFK ends up murdered, and one of the people questioned about that whole murder is Eugene Hale Brady. He's actually in Los Angeles the date that RFK is assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel, which is wild. Eugene Hale Brady, Jim Brady, is one of Sam Giancana's guys. He's one of his hitmen, one of his dirty, men that do dirty things for him. Eugene Hale Brady, also known as James Lee and Jim Braden, had a long criminal background living in California. He was arrested 35 times and had convictions for burglary, illegal bookmaking, and embezzlement. On 21st of November 1963, Brady arrived in Dallas with a man named Morgan Brown of Morgan Brown Oil Company. Very interesting who Morgan Brown is, because Morgan Brown's a con man, and he's an expert in hypnosis. And Morgan Brown, later convicted of these cons and stuff, goes down, and they both stay in Suite 301 of the Cabana Motel in Dallas. Now, later that day, Brady goes down and visits the offices of Texas oil billionaire Harrelson L. Hunt. Apparently visits his son there. It's believed that Jack Ruby was in those offices and visited those offices the same time as Brady, which is really weird. Now, according to some people, Charles Nicoletti, Charles Nicoletti, we know that Charles Nicoletti was being pursued by Jim Garrison for his investigation, and they wanted him to testify to what he knew to the House Select Committee in assassination. Charles Nicoletti was murdered and died the same day as George de Mohrenschildt. So both men were due to appear. Both men were killed the same day. So this was like the loose ends that they were getting rid of everyone before. And then Johnny Rosselli, who was due to be specifically questioned about the killing of JFK, was found sawn in half and stuffed inside an oil drum that was floating in the sea in August of 1976 down in Florida. So all these guys, Johnny Rosselli, all the mafia guys that were in Dallas that day, all wind up dead before they can testify. Weird connection there. Now it turns out these guys were all connected to the Chicago mob, right? Too. So, well, Jim Braden from California and stuff is an interesting character. He's brought in from California, but these guys, Charles Nicoletti and Johnny Rosselli, are like Chicago mobsters under Sam Giancana. So, really, really interesting them coming in. Then apparently the Chicago had their own plot to kill Kennedy. That's right. Thomas Valet, a radical right-wing and expert marksman, was arrested with an M1 rifle, handgun, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition about a week before, in October of 1963, about a week before JFK was due to travel to Chicago. I guess he ended up calling off his visit to Chicago because of all the threats, but somehow didn't see that the threat would extend to Dallas. That once the plot failed in Chicago, and the FBI, they still won't release all the documents related to this case, by the way, and they covered this up for years. Nobody heard about this or knew about this, but the only reason we know about this is because Abraham Bolden, the first Black Secret Service member, blew the whistle on this, and they framed him with a charge and put him in jail for a number of years after the assassination. Then he fought it, and finally got his name back from these people, and was able to beat the case and show the evidence and tell him what he knew. And then they looked it up, and researchers realized, oh my God, there was a whole nother plot. They were going to blame it on Thomas Arthur Valet. It wouldn't have been Lee Harvey Oswald. And look, he's an ex-Marine. He was at U-2 base camp Otso in Japan. Another Japanese U-2 base camp. Trained anti-Castro fighters. Really, really weird coincidences and overlap in both the mole, the FBI, Oswald, the patsy that they had set up in Chicago. When that plot failed, they used the Dallas plot, and they moved some of these assassins into Dallas right ahead of the assassination. And they met with these oil people. That was their point of contact. Eugene Hale Brading gets arrested in the Daltex building by police officers, going in the building after the shooter, right after the shots were fired, and Hale Brading's taking the basement. He took the elevator down from an upper floor right down to the basement and tried to get out there. And that's when they caught him coming off the elevator, and they arrested him and questioned, just brought him in for questioning because he was suspicious why he's, taking the elevator down from the upper floors and then trying to flee the building right after the president gets killed in Dallas. And apparently he went in, to Dallas with to meet up with Johnny Rosselli and Charles Nicoletti, who were alleged to be two of the shooters in the Daltex building. Again, there was another lady on Thursday, October 31st of 1963. A lady telephoned the Chicago police, telling them that she had discovered 4 rifles in one of her rooms that was rented to a group of 4 men. The police informed the Secret Service, who took the 4 men into custody the next day. There's no records anywhere of any weapons having been discovered. The 2 men were interrogated but refused to admit to being part of a conspiracy to murder the president. And it all got covered up somehow by somebody else. The FBI took charge of it, and it disappeared or something, which is just wild. But anyways, these 3 guys, wonder if they were the ones arrested in Chicago. That would be interesting. Not so sure about Eugene Hale Brading, but he's a career criminal that was in Dallas the day of the assassination on oil business and went to the Harold Hunt's offices. I think it's suspicious enough to consider some of these people may have been involved with these kind of connections to the assassination. This is real serious stuff. Now, apparently, Jack Ruby had some connections to the Chicago mob. Apparently, Jack Ruby was in Chicago before he came to Dallas, and that he had, some problems with the mob and also some problems with the bank, and also some problems. He was gay. all around these pretty girls, but he didn't sleep with any of them. He liked guys. Um, Again, he meets in the hotel with Brady. Also, somehow that they're connected. Somehow there's a connection between Braden and Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby Braden's in the Daltex building, taking an elevator down. This is the Daltex building right here, next to the school book depository building, looking straight up Ely Plaza from where this road right here, where the Kennedy, where the president was assassinated, right here. So, is also at the Ambassador Hotel the night that RFK is assassinated. So he attends this meeting, is arrested there, returns to his room rented at the Cabana Hotel. Jack Ruby visits that hotel around midnight. Very, very peculiar, all these connections. And Brady apparently had some links with David Ferry and Santos Trafficante and Carlos Marcello. So there's some interesting mob stuff going on there. And then Ruby's gay lover, Jack Ruby was living with at the time, was Curtis Laverne Crayford, who some people think he's the man that shot Tippit, because he is, again, who shot Tippit? Because Tippit, the guy who shot Tippit was a jacket from a maker in California. And was it Crayford's jacket? Was it Braden's jacket? They said it was Oswald's jacket, but there's some discrepancy in the case with Oswald's route, where the jacket was found, and just whether Oswald killed Tippit at all, because it's just a huge conundrum at this point, trying to unravel all this stuff. And books like haven't exactly helped with the years of disinformation and nonsense. Oswald eventually goes to this Texas theater, winds up, at his rooming house, goes back to the rooming house to grab his gun, and then Officer Tippit's shot away over here somewhere, and then he winds up down here at the rooming house. Kind of an odd detour that he makes there, but again, it's Oswald's found in the theater. This is what he was wearing when he's arrested. They hold him for a day. He tells interviewers that he was just a patsy and he didn't shoot the president. I didn't shoot nobody. No, sir. I'm just a patsy. Jack Ruby comes into the Dallas police headquarters with a pistol. They let him in there because they knew who he was. He's very well trusted and known around the area. So, anyways, Jolly West is assigned to be his court-appointed psychiatrist after Ruby's arrested and in the hospital for shooting Oswald. As soon as Ruby shoots Oswald, he drops the gun and says, "Where am I? What's going on? Where am I? How did I get here? How did I get here? What is going on?" And they wonder what the heck happened to Ruby. Was he hypnotized to shoot Oswald potentially? And Ruby's in jail for the murder of Oswald. The last interview he gives is with a woman named Dorothy Kilgallen. She winds up dead, never gets the story published. And then Ruby goes absolutely insane, and then starts dying of a fast-acting cancer immediately after. And his court-appointed psychiatrist turns out to be this guy, Jolly West. And we look into the history of Jolly West and realize that he's one of the main psychiatrists in the whole MK Ultra program. He helped set up, and MK Ultra, he was very closely connected with the CIA's poisoner in chief, Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who was drugging all kinds of people with LSD back in the 60s and 50s, including Frank Olson. And a number of people believe that the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, where a number of where Charles Manson sought treatment for drug abuse and drug addiction back in the 60s, and the Haight-Ashbury scene was a huge scene in the 60s counterculture. 1969, the year that these Sharon Tate was murdered, was also some weird connections there too with her husband and the Hollywood people involved. And then, of course, the prosecutor in the Manson case turns out to have these weird CIA connections as well. Blames this thing on this. The motive for the Manson murders is helter skelter, that they wanted to start a whole race war by murdering these. They murdered Sharon Tate, and they blamed it on black people. They were trying to murder these Hollywood celebrities who everyone knew, and then blame them on black people, and to have this chilling psychological effect. And this is I see it. Yes, I know. Come on. Oh, like, why do you have to do this to me while I'm live? All right, I have to go take a look at something real quick and see what the heck. But yeah, Jolly West, MK Ultra, and then so is the guy who's the prosecutor in the case. They prosecute Manson for these murders, but Manson could have been given drugs and programmed and with hypnosis at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, where they were experimenting with all this stuff back in the 60s. So there's a whole rabbit hole to be dove down here with Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor in that case, and how he covered up evidence in the Manson murders that could have we know about the Summer of Love, 1969, this Haight-Ashbury Clinic where they were running all these LSD experiments, and the CIA was running all this stuff. And Whitey Bulger was also a victim of MK Ultra acid experiments. He was given LSD in solitary confinement at Alcatraz. Writes about it and talks about it. Also, another famous victim of MK Ultra was Ted Kaczynski, who was a brilliant mathematician and scientist doing incredible math work before they turned him into an absolute lunatic nutcase through LSD experiments. And then he eventually became the Unabomber. Dr. Henry Murray was the CIA doctor in charge of those operations. Frank Olson, of course, developed the Rainbow Herbicide Program. He developed Operation Sea Spray. That's the whole. You know what that is, right? That's the whole That's chemtrails. This guy set up the chemtrail program. He was covertly dosed with LSD in 1953, and 9 days later, threw himself or was thrown out of a window at the Hotel Statler in New York. So, very similar to the death of James Forrestal, of course, was sent to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Bethesda is where they did the autopsy on JFK, and Bethesda was also where they sent you if you needed to be reprogrammed. They put you on a mental ward and say that, we're going to keep you here forever until you say that you didn't see what you said you saw. Another interesting, a lot of the CIA work that was going on at the time, Lloyd Berkner was going to meet with JFK in Dallas that day, and they were making moves to declassify a lot of the secret space program stuff and really go after, he said we wanted to go to the moon. He was trying to get this secret space program stuff out to the public. Then gets to Dallas that day, of course, the mayor of Dallas and these people in charge of picking the parade route and selecting all these things are all tied into one another and in charge. This is the view from the white picket fence where the headshot was fired from. This is the view from the 6th floor school book depository building looking down on Dealey Plaza. This is looking toward Houston Street. This is Elm Street. This is looking toward the Daltex buildings right here, courthouse and the jail. And this was the Social Security Administration building. Again, this is the sixth floor of the school book depository. I'm going to have to play a clip or something while I take a quick break. I want to play a quick clip for you coming up soon. Let me just find it for you. Gordon Arnold testimony, because we're going to get to this in just a second. But this is, again, Dealey Plaza on the day. This is an overview shot showing the perspective on the Dealey Plaza, and we're going to talk about some of the witnesses and what they saw that day, and some of that information. So let's start with the railroad men on the overpass. Okay. And gonna pull this off. Stop sharing that. I'm gonna press escape. I gotta find the video. Railroad men on the triple overpass. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for all the super chats and donations. That's very helpful. This research took a lot of time and effort to compile, and I just appreciate everybody who's there and who helped out with that. We're going to play this clip right now for y'all, and you can check out the witnesses to the JFK assassination and what they saw. This is super important.
As the presidential limousine was rounding the curve on Elm Street, there was a loud explosion. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot. And it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees on the embankment. I was talking with a patrolman Foster at the time, and as soon as we heard the shots, we ran around to the wooden fence. And when we got there, there was no one there, but there was footprints in the mud around the fence, and there was footprints on the wooden 2x4 railing on the fence.
Were you questioned by the Dallas police on that day?
Yes, I was.
Did you give your name to the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell them what you've just told me?
Yes, I did.
Were you subsequently questioned by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
About a month later, I was questioned by the FBI.
Did you tell them what you told me and what you told the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir, I wasn't.
Where were you on November 22nd, Mr. Dodd?
I was standing on the underpass, Commerce Underpass in Dallas, Texas.
Were you alone?
No, I was along with 3 friends of mine.
Railroad men?
Yeah, all railroad men.
Mr. Holland was one of them.
That's right.
And did you see anything which might indicate to you where the shots came from?
Well, we all 3 seen about the same thing as the shots. The smoke came from behind the hedge.
Did you look in any particular direction when you heard the shots?
Yes, I looked over to where I thought the shot came from, and I saw a puff of smoke still lingering underneath the trees in front of the wooden fence.
Is this the exact spot you were standing on November 22nd, Mr. Holland?
That's correct. This is the exact spot that I was standing November the 22nd, waiting for the parade.
And where did you hear that third shot come from?
Right over about 20 or 30 feet from the other end of that little picket fence.
And where was the smoke that you saw?
It drifted right out underneath those green trees, those 2 trees.
From behind the fence?
from behind the fence. It kind of hung there just like for a few seconds, long enough that you could see that it was
And then what?
puff of smoke.
And then what'd you do?
Immediately after the president's car came underneath this overpass, a four of us broke a run around this fence to find out if we could see anybody leaving the area.
Can we walk this way now that you went on the 22nd?
No, we go up that way right now.
Fine.
So we were trying to see what we could see, and
So I wanted to show that for some perspective, because it's important to take note of the fact that they were not called to testify to the Warren Commission about what they saw. None of these three railroad workers who were in Dealey Plaza, right here where the front tip of that train car is, this front train car is basically where they were standing, right over this first section of the triple overpass. So they had the best view of the entire, the school book depository, and then the grassy knoll right here with these two trees right here. That's where they saw the puff of smoke come out. And that's apparently where the shooter was standing. And they were three of these railroad workers right here, and they ran right around here as soon as they heard the shots fired, and they got through here. They found it's all congested with cars in this area, and they weaved their way through the car until they got over to this area. It probably took them about a minute and a half. By the time they got over there, the shooters had already disappeared and were already gone. Now, very curious, because here's where they were. That's the white picket fence, and B is the railroad control tower. You see, after the assassination, everyone ran up to the fence to try to look up here and see what they could see. In fact, a number of people ran straight for the that area in the corner, right up the knoll, and try to chase the assassins, trying to figure out where the assassins went, and look, and there was nothing to be seen. So it's wild that you think right here, this is, I measured it, it's 230 feet to walk from where they were standing, even if they were on the far end of that, where they were standing, over to here, 230 feet. So that's not a far walk. It's not far. And for them to be gone by the time they get them, then this is the red control tower here in the lot. You can see all the tracks, and this guy's got almost a direct view. Sees a flash of smoke here, and then I don't know if he saw this, but this is where it was on the day of the assassination and how it looked. This is the back of that ring structure. And this is right through here is the path that would lead down where those stairs are that lead down to Elm Street. And right here is the white picket fence, which goes around. And then the back of there is where they would have came around. So there's been all these theories about where the assassins would have ran to after they had completed the shots, and where they could have gone, how they could have gotten out of there. Because again, you got these three railroad workers right there who walk right around the corner and right up on their spot. If you try to walk this way back through the lot, you got to walk right past, this is the back end of the school book depository building on Houston Street, that all the way on that side, looking this way towards the lot. You can see here's the red building from that side, where the train car can see all that, everything, right? It's about a 500 feet from the knoll to the back of the building, but you got to walk right across the main entrance to the school book depository right there, which is where all the police ran when they heard the shots being fired from the 6th floor, because there was definitely a shooter on the 6th floor of the school book depository building. So walking right past where all those cops would have been, looking straight down this way, wouldn't have been, there were probably cops running down the street too to get to the knoll this way. So you got to think how you're setting this up as a shooter. How could you get away with this? You could walk down this line of cars, and then someone would, by the time you're walking across the train tracks trying to make your escape out this way anyway, you're an easy view of this control tower. So you got to find a way to distract the guy in the control tower while this is going on. he's the main one that you could see, and then you can't go this way, you can't go that way. How do you get out of this lot? And the best answer to the solution I found is when you find out that, you know, these guys were connected with the Civil Air Patrols along with Lee Harvey Oswald. And one of the main people at the Civil Air Patrol was his buddy here is a guy named Roscoe White, who was a Dallas police officer on November 22nd, 1963. He went from Marine buddy Oswald, was stationed at Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan with Oswald, potentially connection with the CIA, and then he's working for the Dallas police. November 22nd, 1960. He gets a job with them 11/5. The month of the assassination, he signs up with Dallas Police Force, gets hired on. And years later, his son says in his memoirs, he found his dad had all this stuff saying that he was involved in the assassination. And Gordon Arnold, again, this picture of the assassination you can see here. Here's Abraham Zapruder. This is I think the Mary Mormon photograph or the Nix film. I'm not sure, but here you can see a figure which looks like Gordon Arnold, and here's a figure that looks like that's most definitely Abraham Zapruder, and his wife standing behind him, stabilizing his camera while he's filming the assassination for the Zapruder film. So Gordon Arnold says, you know, I was there and I filmed the assassination right here. And then a month later, I was on the plane to I was on a week later. I'd left for Alaska to join the military, and I didn't come back for, you know, a long time. So they weren't able to find him or track him down or get rid of him. But they at least took his film. He said he filmed the whole assassination from a way better angle and had a way steadier hand than Zapruder, and that this guy jumped over the fence with a badge and made him take his film out the camera and took the film from him. That's what he testifies to. He said he's standing right here, filmed the assassination. The shots came right from over his shoulder. And then the guy, you know, apparently Roscoe White was the rifleman, you know, the Marine trained sniper on the grassy knoll. And what better for him to, you know, hand his gun to another gunman who then puts it in the patrol car, which is sitting right there in the lot. Again, you have a patrol car right here waiting right behind the knoll. You can just throw the gun right in there, jump over the fence, take this guy's, make sure the witnesses are all right, clear the area, jump right back in your patrol car, and then just take off and go right out around here and out of the lot. And no one would be at all suspicious of a damn police car, you know, rolling through there. They wouldn't even think twice about seeing the police car, right? So this is well thought out and well planned ahead of time. Whoever came up with this operation, and they did their best to, you know, they're lucky that Gordon Arnold was there, or Zapruder, you know, would have been the first target. I assume. Like, why didn't they take Zapruder's film if they took Arnold's? And I think it's because he was in such a panic to get out of there. That he just he left right away. But it would be everybody ran to the knoll. Everybody ran up the knoll or you know, towards that area to back behind there. I wonder if there's any witnesses that ran there that would have seen something. Man, Robert Groden, another JFK expert, he's been set up out there in Dealey Plaza, and the sixth floor museum has been the one that's called the police on him 82 times, gotten him arrested 82 times. But he goes out there and makes a case for the conspiracy and shows everyone he's got a DVD that he gives out. And he's been on Mark Grobert's channel with America's Untold Stories, which is another awesome reference for JFK related material. And but Robert Groden's been arrested 82 times on these bad charges and takes it to trial and beats it. And you know, this is it just goes to show you all these examples. The CIA and the NSA and FBI and all these shadow organizations that represent the what we know as the intelligence community have essentially just, you know, taken over. and polluted the whole government. They're another fourth branch of government, and they've basically got their hands and vines through the other three branches and are controlling them. It's CIA was Truman's lapdog when he created it in 47, but by 63, Kennedy was struggling to get a hold of that dog, and now now let's go. We're going through the RFK assassination. We'll learn more, but we'll get to how bad it is now. Sirhan, the only man in history to shoot a man in the back of the head while standing in front of him. He's also the only man in history to shoot 13 bullets from an 8-shot revolver. Amazing. Amazing work was done that day. RFK has called out the true assassin of his father. RFK Jr. says that Thane Eugene Caesar, the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works security guard, was there at the Ambassador Hotel, posted as extra beefed up security for RFK in his detail, and was the man who led RFK into the pantry where hypnotized Patsy Sirhan. Sirhan was waiting with his 8-shot revolver to empty it into RFK. The shot that killed RFK, there were two of them. One went through his shoulder and into the side of his right ear, and the other one right back into the back of his head and where the spine is. And both of them were shot from behind at an upwards angle, right behind the right shoulder blade, right where Thane Eugene Caesar was standing, leading RFK into the pantry. Paul Schrade was standing next to RFK Jr. and got shot in the head by Sirhan. He says there's no way that Sirhan killed RFK Jr. and the shot came from behind and right where Thane Eugene Caesar, the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works security guard, who had ties to the CIA, was standing. And then Caesar, immediately when suspicion started growing, he moved to Philippines and lived in the Philippines in exile until he died in 2019 on September 11th. No less. Very interesting. The magic man behind all this is a guy named William Joseph Bryan Jr., who is an American physician and a pioneering hypnotist. He was one of the founders of modern hypnotherapy, and his work notably found the use in psychological warfare during the Cold War. So he was the great-grandson of United States Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, and he was one of the founders of the CIA's MK Ultra program. He used to love building these boards for the CIA and for their hypnotists to run these experiments so that they didn't have to ever physically interact with their subjects. That's great for, if Sirhan ever tries to identify the person that hypnotized him and wants to testify and be like, hey, this CIA MK Ultra hypnotist hypnotized me through a wall on this giant computer system that he built, and I never actually saw him. So, yeah, crazy. And they could play audio, have pre-recorded clips, control strobe lights and other visualizations. The strobe lights and other visualizations could be meant to set up visual brain patterns in the cerebral cortex and tune people into different, the theta, and then tune you down. They'd probably start you off at alpha and then tune you down slowly into the theta state. And once they can drop you into that state, then they can put you in hypnosis. And there's lots of evidence that Sirhan was done this through his writing journals. So they get him to start writing and getting to then repeat things, then keep writing, then repeat things, and then when they get him into this repetition is when he'd go into these trances. This is trance writing, and this is obviously hypnosis that were run on him. If you look at his journals and read his journals, and one of the most fascinating things researchers have found from reading his journals is the name DeSalvo in one of his journals. DeSalvo is the Boston Strangler who was admittedly hypnotized by CIA hypnotist William Joseph Bryan Jr. to get the confession for the Boston Strangling murders out of the Boston Strangler. So we know for a fact that he's the CIA hypnotist that hypnotized DeSalvo. So why is Sirhan writing DeSalvo in his hypnosis journals around the same time. It's just a odd connection that people have made. The BBC and there's a documentary called RFK Must Die that tries to link up some of these CIA agents to being at the Ambassador Hotel the night that RFK was murdered, saying that this guy is George Joannides. Some resemblance, but I don't know if that's a positive identification on this guy. It doesn't quite seem like it. The dental doesn't seem the same. Gordon Campbell, obviously, people pointed out that there's a death certificate showing that Gordon Campbell died of a heart attack at Zenith headquarters, which, Zenith Enterprises was the CIA front company for the CIA's Miami operation during the 60s. So he died there in 62 of a heart attack, apparently. So there's no way that he could have been at the Ambassador Hotel in 68 if he died in 62. So yeah, that I don't think I think the BBC got it wrong. I think that they put out some misinformation, some misguided information, along with some potentially, real information on, this guy has way too much hair to be George, in 68. George was losing his hair by then and going gray, and this guy's, got I don't know, maybe he's just growing a healthy head of hair since he took this picture and changed his glasses a little bit, because he's got like he's always had like the same glasses on. So anyways, Darren Brown, apparently a hypnotist, and although I seem to think all of his stuff is fake and completely made up, but apparently he says that, certain people can be hypnotized, and that, this guy's one of them, and that you can use hypnosis to program an assassin, and they tried it out for a show, and they did it, and this guy programmed him to shoot Stephen Fry with blanks, and Fry was the whole theater was kind of like shocked when the guy pulls out a gun and shoots Stephen Fry in front of all of them, and then Darren Brown comes out and tell him it's all one of his illusions where he's showed everyone that you can do this. But Kennedy dies in 68. He would have run for president in 69 and probably won. Man, he had a lot of support. So the CIA taking him out at that time was key, because he wanted to go right after. Yeah, good knowledge. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate that $50, man. Thank you. And you can always ask questions. Super chat questions will always get asked on the show. Kennedy, 68, dies. 68 is also the year that they retired the U-2. After Francis Gary Powers got shot down shortly after, Oswald defected in 61, 1960s, right? They disconnected they discontinued the U-2, and then they discontinued the A-12 in 68 and went full production on the SR-71 Blackbird, which was the replacement. So the SR-71 comes out of all that, which is 1968. Again, MLK, we can't talk about this because we'll get censored by YouTube, so we're going to skip that one for now. But again, the whole takeover takes place in that same amount of time. And again, 68, and then right after 68 is 69. That's the Summer of Love, with this whole rising in the Haight-Ashbury district, which the CIA must have been all over, trying to, derail the entire population that was rising up with the hippie movements of the 60s and the political movements that were going on, and completely corrupt them with drugs and mind control programs, which is what I believe we first saw with the Manson murders in 69. And so the deep state control over America since JFK. So they kill RFK in 69, and then they install their man Nixon in. Nixon was just vice president during the whole 2 terms of the Eisenhower administration. And, so right back into power after LBJ gets out. they put Nixon back in, that, after they kill RFK, and RFK doesn't get in. Now Nixon has to resign midterm, and then of course Ford, his vice president, takes over and takes the reins, right? Ford was, as you recall, a member of the Warren Commission, which is the official investigation into the Kennedy assassination. So, this guy gets, you did such a good job covering up the work we did in '63. You get elected president. And after the whole scandal with Nixon and Ford being put in the hot seat for that last year, the next election, people overwhelmingly want change, and they want someone who's outside this deep state. Similar to what we tried to do with Obama, thinking that he wasn't deep state until we learned that his grandmother was CIA, and his father and his stepfather were CIA, and all this with Barry Soetoro and all those connections, that old news. But Jimmy Carter gets elected, and off a whim, and he immediately wants to go after the UFOs. He asks his CIA director, George H.W. Bush, about the UFOs. It's on record. He's trying to go after the whole JFK stuff and the RFK stuff. Jimmy Carter wants business, and he opens up the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Again, this is the Grateful Dead at Haight-Ashbury in L.A., the center of this cultural revolution in the summer of love. Richard Nixon was president right after that. Of course, he was vice president before that, from 53 to 60. In 71, he starts the war on drugs. Meanwhile, a lot of the guys from Operation 40, not a lot of the guys, but Barry Seal of Operation 40 is teamed up now with the CIA and is starting this whole drug smuggling enterprise. Of course, in Vietnam, which Johnson started Vietnam, they had a lot of drug trafficking was going on in Vietnam with the CIA, under the guise of Air America Incorporated, which was the CIA airline in Southeast Asia. There's a whole movie about this with Mel Gibson. Why do you think Mel Gibson's so woke and talking about all this stuff on Rogan? And he was, there's is that Robert Downey Jr.? Yeah, Air America is this movie that they made about the whole real CIA operation called Air America, where these guys were trying to blow the whistle on the drug smuggling operation, and they say, look, we're gonna get all your evidence, and we're gonna put you right on a plane to they went to their superiors with all the evidence. They're like, we've been collecting data. We know that there's this big drug smuggling operation going on here, and we'd like to report it. And here's all the evidence we have on it. And the guy's like, oh my God, well, we're going to set you up right away on a flight. You're going to headquarters right now, back at base, and we're going to fly you there with all your evidence, and right first thing in the morning. So the guys get on the plane in the movie with all their evidence, and they take off, and they realize that all their evidence has been replaced with all the drugs, and so, and they've been set up. So they take the fall, and the guys who are really doing it continue on. It's really a messed up thing about the Golden Triangle existed in that time, and tons of soldiers were going over there and getting hooked on the heroin, and sewing up bodies of the soldiers coming back with kilos of heroin sewed up inside them, and smuggling it back through there. All kinds of crazy stuff going on. But I heard Ian Carroll on Joe Rogan and talking about the whole opium wars and everything, but a connection that he really missed is the whole Russell and Company connection, because following the Panic of 1819, Samuel Russell and Philip Amadon ventured into the opium business, and they set up this company right in Canton, present day Guangzhou, and there was their headquarters. And this was shortly before the Opium Wars. The whole Opium Wars started several years after that, but they were the main opium smugglers. And after they got kind of kicked out of Canton, and and they moved to the United States and moved the family to Connecticut and opened up Russell and Company here in Connecticut. And a big part of the Afghan opium production annually since 1980, you see that Afghanistan turned into a major hub of opium supply while we were over there. In 2007, I think was the peak. They supplied, I think, like 94% of the Earth's heroin during that year, which is wild when you make that whole connection to all this, because you know, as we learn about the whole history of where this family and these people went, they went from the being drug dealers, setting up the opium wars. They moved to Connecticut. And who else grew up in Connecticut, right in the same town, along with these guys, is the Bush family. We learn later on, their ancestors, the children of the Russell family, wind up in some very interesting places, as we learn the whole history of Wirt Dexter Walker, who's the mystery man in the World Trade Center 9/11 investigation, which we'll get into later. The whole war on drugs is declared in 71. The prison population until 2007, again, it goes up by a massive amount. We're now one of the least free countries in the world. We turned America the free into America the enslaved through the Nixon and CIA policies that were set up in the 70s. And these people are all part of an intelligence operation which utilizes the government and the courts for the deep state and their objectives, while smuggling the drugs into this country, while setting up other people to take the fall, while busting the drug dealers once they get too big, and then taking their money and absorbing it back into their systems, which fund themselves. Again, Bush being a central figure in all this, the CIA director under Jimmy Carter, hired to clean up the CIA, ends up moving all the corrupt stuff in the CIA to other countries, including the BCCI in Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, and some of these Middle Eastern allies as well. Bill Clinton becomes president because, of course, he's running the MENA operation in Arkansas for all the cocaine smuggling for George Bush and the CIA at the time. And then Bush wins the election against Al Gore in 2000 and gets in, and W. Bush is running mate as Dick Cheney. And that's where we're going to get into, the Cold War is over, John. Stock market's flat. And, without a clear enemy. Anyways, we need a clear enemy. We're setting up these groups of terrorists and funding these networks of terrorists through the BCCI and the whole Bank of Credit and Commerce International and USAID and all those other kind of operations that people are learning about, and funding these terrorist groups. And, people forget 15 of the 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Well, 12 of those 15 Saudi Arabian hijackers got their Saudi visas, their passports, to enter the United States through one Saudi embassy, which is where John Brennan was the CIA station chief during the time. So John Brennan, as CIA station chief in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, helps these 12 hijackers get their visas to enter the United States. During the Bush administration. This is before he becomes CIA. He becomes CIA director. They bring this guy out of the shadows of, where did John Brennan come from and why did he get to be CIA director? And well, it's because when John Brennan went to Saudi Arabia and became CIA, the director of the CIA's station chief over in Saudi Arabia, he made lots and lots of friends with the Saudi intelligence and the Saudi royal family, as did a number of other interesting people, like the director of the FBI, Louis Freeh. And Louis Freeh is now the attorney for Bandar bin Sultan, Bandar Bush, who's seen here with George Bush. Bandar and the Bush family are really good friends and go way back too. So really interesting, going way, way back. They invited Bandar to Kennebunkport, Maine, to the Bush compound up in Maine, where the Bushes vacation every summer. So, I mean, they've been good friends for years. This is a young Bandar. This is Bandar, closer to after 9/11, to now when his attorney is the former head of the FBI, who quit just before 9/11 and installed cover-up mastermind Robert Mueller. But anyways, Bandar is the guy mentioned in the 28 redacted pages from the 9/11 Commission who funded the hijackers through middleman Omar al-Bayoumi. And it just gets a little deeper because, Operation Green Quest was the U.S. government investigation into deterrence financing that began in 2001 after the September 11th attacks. And the operation dug into a guy named Yassin al-Qaidi, who was an investor in a company out of Quincy, Mass. Here called P-Tech. And P-Tech was, collaborated with MITRE Corporation, which had connections to, of course, former CIA Director John Deutsch. And the P-Tech software was used to coordinate with FAA and NORAD and the Secret Service. So the P-Tech designed the software for these very high-tech government systems for, handling disaster scenario. Like basically the continuity of government program was hiring, MITRE Corp, who contracted with P-Tech to build all this stuff, which is the infrastructure for all the, continuity of government program response stuff that the government had to respond to attacks like 9/11 or terrorist attacks or anything that could happen, the assassination of the president and the vice president at the same time. You name it. That was their job, is to think up the craziest doomsday scenarios and then plan for it. And these are the companies that built all the defense infrastructure to, put all this together. And Deutsch, CIA Director Deutsch, became director of the CIA in May 1995. He left the CIA almost 2 years later and became director at Citigroup, a company that was saved in 1998 by Prince Al-Walid of Saudi Arabia in a deal brokered by the Carlyle Group. Well, Citigroup is interesting, and that will come up again in the 9/11 stuff, as we'll see. Attorney General Janet Reno refused to prosecute Deutsch because he was investigated in August 1999 for leaking classified information. But Janet Reno never followed through with that prosecution. What's interesting is we'll get back to John Deutsch in a minute, because there's just so many connections here. It goes so deep. Osama bin Laden, the son of, he's just like the black sheep of his family. They're actually a rich family. There's two big families in Saudi Arabia that are the main finances and business group for the Saudi royal family. That's the bin Laden family and the bin Mahfouz family. And the bin Laden family, runs the bin Laden Construction Group, which is like a huge business. Now, Shafiq bin Laden, was the bin Laden's brother, was actually in the Carlyle Group meeting the morning of 9/11 at the the Ritz-Carlton Inn. James Baker, former national security advisor for the Bush, the first Bush administration, and Secretary of the Treasury, was in this Carlyle Group meeting, the big money guy with Bush, meeting with Shafiq bin Laden on Carlyle Group business the morning of 9/11. And they're like the only people allowed to fly out of the country the morning of 9/11. This was covered in Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. Sorry, took me a minute. Fahrenheit 9/11, connects all these connections, which very interesting, because who got the contracts to rebuild Iraq after we went and blew it up and destroyed it? Well, the biggest construction company got all that prime real estate, and that's the bin Laden Construction Group. So a number of people have sold out to these Saudis. The Saudis got big money. I mean, trillions of dollars in oil, and then they're just like huge. They're good friends to have, I guess. They're also really bad enemies to have, because look what happened to Khashoggi and that whole incident. right? So John Brennan, his path over in Saudi Arabia is very similar to George Tenet's path, because George Tenet, as people know in the history of George Tenet, is he was one of the station chiefs over in Saudi Arabia doing all this Saudi stuff with, covering for the Bush's secret networks and CIA stuff that they had to set up with BCCI in Saudi Arabia. To cover for all that back in the 70s and 80s. So George Tenet goes back to all that, and that's where George Tenet comes from. Brennan is kind of his replacement over there, and the guy who comes after him with all this. But it's these important financial Saudi connections in this Citibank, Citicorp, Citigroup connection, which is interesting because. As we'll see, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Saudi royal family, Bush's connections with them, the BCCI, founded in 1972. It really takes off when the CIA gets a hold of it in 76, when they're trying to hide all this stuff under Carter and the House Select Committee. So they had really, this all blew up. And Turk al-Fausil, he's been head of the Saudi intelligence since 1979. Until September. He resigned as the head of Saudi intelligence about 10 days before 9/11. So he knew something was up. He dismissed the CIA's finding that Jamal Khashoggi's murder was ordered directly by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, saying that the CIA has been proven wrong before. Yeah, really interesting about Khashoggi's murder and his comments on all that. But really important is who was in the White House with Bush for 9/11 and really set the stage for all this, because you got this guy Rumsfeld, who comes from a background where he worked for Rand Corporation, A.B. Brown, A.B. Bovary, Asia Brown Bovary, Tribune Media. So he has the media company, and then Amylin Pharmaceuticals and Gilead. But the real interesting one is G.D. Searle LLC, which is a division of Pfizer. G.D. Searle LLC actually produced aspartame, and he used remarkable connections of to capture, proving his ability to capture regulatory agencies, because they captured the regulatory agency of the FDA and they got approval for aspartame, which is a poison. It should have never, ever been approved. Is this Pfizer poison that, it should be taken out of every product on the shelves. It really should, if we really wanted to make America healthy again. Why isn't RFK and all these people going after aspartame and the whole history here? Because, Donald Rumsfeld, working for Pfizer and then using his government connections to get FDA approval for aspartame is a huge deal. And then, of course, both Dick Cheney, his whole ties to Halliburton and the military-industrial complex with Kellogg, Brown and Root and Bechtel and all that, and also the Beltway group agencies like DynCorp and those connections, which again Rumsfeld is connected to as well, which come into play. Those connections are very interesting when considering 9/11 and the connections to Epstein as well, because DynCorp was also convicted of child sex trafficking back in the early 2000s, if you look into that. But both Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld's most interesting connection is that they work for Citibank on the Foreign Policy Advisory Board for Solomon Smith Barney. Again, Citibank, Citicorp, this bank that keeps kind of changing its name numerous times. Solomon Smith Barney is the main bank inside of World Trade Center Building 7. Okay, they occupy 85% of Building 7. And we're going to get into this so hard in part 2. Thank you all for watching, and please join me tomorrow night for part 2. Thank you all for watching. Have a great night.